The router blade screamed against the oak plank as Martin Landry guided it through another precise cut. Wood shavings curled away from the blade in perfect spirals, falling to the concrete floor of his workshop. The smell of fresh-cut lumber filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of machinery and the faint trace of wood stain from yesterday's project. His phone buzzed against the workbench. Martin shut off the router and wiped his hands on his leather apron before picking up. Landry Woodworking. Is this Martin Landry? The voice belonged to a woman, official and tired. Speaking. This is Officer Patricia Nguyen with Portland Police Bureau. We found your 3-year-old son. Please come pick him up. Martin's grip tightened on the phone. He stared at the half-finished dining table before him, its surface still rough with tool marks. I don't have a kid. Silence stretched between them. Then the officer spoke again, her voice carrying an eerie calm that made Martin's skin crawl. Sir, you need to come down here. Look, I think you got the wrong. Southeast Precinct. 4911, Southeast Powell Boulevard. Ask for me at the front desk. The line went dead. Martin stood in his workshop, surrounded by the tools and timber that made sense to him. Everything here followed rules. Measurements were exact. Joints either fit or they didn't. Wood grain ran in predictable patterns. This phone call fit none of those rules. He grabbed his keys from the pegboard and headed for his truck. The precinct smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Martin's work boots squeaked against the polished linoleum as he followed Officer Nguyen down a narrow corridor. Third door on the left, she said, stopping outside a small room with a window in the door. Martin looked through the glass and felt the world shift beneath his feet that a small boy sat at a plastic table, his legs dangling from an adult-sized chair. Dark hair fell across his forehead in unruly waves. He clutched a green dinosaur plushie against his chest, the toy's fabric worn soft from constant handling. The child looked up as the door opened, and Martin's breath caught in his throat. Hazel eyes. The same color as his own, flecked with gold around the iris. The same dimpled chin that Martin saw every morning in his bathroom mirror. Mr. Landry. A young woman rose from another chair. Hispanic features, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, a badge clipped to her blazer. I'm Marla Vega, Child Protective Services. This is Maceo. Martin stepped into the room, but kept his distance from the table. There's been a mistake. His name is Maceo. Marla continued as if she hadn't heard him. He was found alone in a motel room. The room was registered under your wife's name. The boy Maceo watched Martin with those unsettling, familiar eyes. He pressed his face against the dinosaur's plastic head and whispered something Martin couldn't hear. What did he say? Martin asked. Marla glanced at the child, then back at Martin. He asked if you're his daddy. Martin drove home in a daze, his truck weaving slightly as his mind raced. He'd left the precinct with more questions than answers and a business card with Marla Vega's number burning a hole in his jacket pocket. His house sat on a quiet street lined with Douglas firs, a modest 2-story he'd bought 5 years ago when he married Hollis. The front porch sagged slightly. He kept meaning to fix it, but never found the time. Inside, silence greeted him. No music from the kitchen, where Hollis liked to cook with the radio on. No sound of her laptop keys clicking as she worked on her freelance graphic design projects. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. This is Hollis. Leave a message. Her voice sounded cheerful, normal, not like someone who'd abandoned a child in a motel. Call me, Martin said after the beep. We need to talk. He tried her again an hour later, then again after dinner. Same result. Her laptop sat closed on the kitchen counter. Martin opened it and was greeted by a password screen. He tried her birthday, their anniversary, their first dog's name. Nothing worked. His phone rang as he stared at the locked screen. Martin, his sister's voice, sharp with concern. Are you okay? You sound weird in your message. Cheyenne worked the night shift at Providence Hospital, which meant she was just waking up. Martin could picture her in her small apartment across town, hair still messy from sleep, coffee mug in hand. Hollis is gone, he said. Gone where? I don't know. The police called me today. Said they found my son. Silence. Then, you're what? Martin told her everything. The phone call, The precinct, the boy with his eyes and chin. When he finished, Cheyenne was quiet for a long moment. You think she was cheating? She finally asked. I think she was living a completely different life. Have you checked her social media? Martin opened his laptop and navigated to Hollis's Instagram account. The page was blank, no posts, no followers, no following. Her Facebook showed the same thing. Even her LinkedIn profile had vanished. It's all gone, he told Cheyenne. Like she never existed. People don't just disappear, Martin. Not unless they plan it. Martin thought about the last few weeks. Hollis had been distant, spending more time on her phone, taking calls in the other room. But she'd also been oddly affectionate, bringing him coffee in the workshop, kissing him goodbye in the mornings when she hadn't done that in months. She knew, he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. She knew this was coming. 3 days later, Martin sat in another sterile room, this time at the lab downtown. The technician had swabbed the inside of his cheek with clinical efficiency, sealed the sample in a tube, and told him results would be ready in 48 hours, the 48 hours that crawled by like weeks. His phone rang at 2:17 p.m. on Friday as he was sanding a cabinet door. Mr. Landry? This is Dr. Chun from Pacific Genetic Labs. Your paternity test results are ready. Martin set down his sandpaper. And the probability of paternity is 99.9%. Congratulations, you're the father. The phone slipped from Martin's hand and clattered to the workbench. Around him, his workshop buzzed with the normal sounds of running machinery from neighboring units. But everything felt muffled, distant. He was a father. Hollis had carried another man's child, his child for 9 months. Had given birth. Had raised a boy for 3 years. Had used Martin's name on official documents, his identity, to create a paper trail he knew nothing about. And then she'd vanished. Martin picked up his phone and called Marla Vega. I want custody, he said when she answered. We need to discuss. No discussion. He's my son. I want him. But even as he said the words, Martin felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. Not love for the child, not yet. Not forgiveness for Hollis, never. Just a grim determination to take back control of his life. The emergency custody hearing took place on a Tuesday morning in a courthouse that smelled like old carpet and bureaucracy. Martin sat across from Marla Vega as a judge reviewed the paperwork. Maceo playing quietly with blocks in the corner under the watchful eye of a court-appointed supervisor. Given the biological confirmation and the mother's absence, Judge Martinez said, I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Landry pending a full investigation. Temporary. The word felt like a challenge. That evening, Martin found himself in the surreal position of preparing dinner for two. Maceo sat at the kitchen table, still clutching his dinosaur, watching Martin's every move with those disconcerting hazel eyes. Are you hungry? Martin asked. The boy nodded but didn't speak. Martin heated up canned soup and made grilled cheese sandwiches, remembering how his sister used to make them when their mother was too drunk to cook. He set a bowl in front of Maceo and watched him eat in small, careful bites. Where's Mommy? Maceo asked suddenly. I don't know. She said we were going to Canada. She said you were dangerous. Martin's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. She said what? But Maceo had gone back to eating, retreating into that shell of silence children build when the adult world becomes too confusing to navigate. That night, after putting Maceo to bed in the guest room, Martin sat at his kitchen table with Hollis's laptop and notepad. The password screen still mocked him, but he found other ways to trace her digital footprints. Their joint credit card statements revealed a pattern he'd been too trusting to notice before. Charges at motels he'd never heard of. Gas stations in towns he'd never visited. A purchase at a children's clothing store 3 months ago that he'd assumed was for her cousin's kid. Phone bills showed calls to numbers he didn't recognize. Text messages to contacts listed only as initials .1 number appeared frequently over the past 6 months. Always late at night, after Martin had gone to bed, he called it. You've reached Corey. Leave a message. A man's voice. Deep, confident. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who worked with his hands, like Martin did. Martin hung up without leaving a message. The next morning, Martin called in sick to cancel his appointments and drove 2 hours south to Salem. The address he'd found belonged to Laken Branner, Hollis's sister. They'd met twice in 5 years of marriage, once at the wedding, Once at an awkward Christmas dinner that ended with Lakin storming out after too much wine and harsh words about their childhood. The apartment complex sat in a part of town where the chain restaurants had broken windows and the parking lots needed repaving. Martin climbed 2 flights of external stairs and knocked on apartment 2B. The woman who answered looked like Hollis might in 10 years and 10,000 cigarettes. Same bone structure, same green eyes, but harder edges and deep lines around her mouth. Well, shit, Lakin said. If it isn't the husband, we need to talk. She looked him up and down, taking in his work clothes and grim expression. About Hollis? Good luck with that. She's been lying since she could talk. Lakin's apartment was small and cluttered, ashtrays overflowing on every surface. She poured herself coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since morning and didn't offer Martin any. When's the last time you talked to her? Martin asked. 6 months ago. Maybe 7. She called asking about Mom's medical records. Something about family history for insurance. Did she mention a child? Lakin laughed, a bitter sound. Hollis with a kid? That's rich. She always said children were for poor people who couldn't figure out how to make real money. But something in her expression shifted. Why? Don't tell me she finally got pregnant. 3 years ago. Huh. Lakin lit a cigarette and took a long drag. That explains the weight she gained when I saw her last Christmas. She said it was stress eating. Tell me about her, Martin said. Growing up. College. Before me. You really don't know her at all, do you? Lakin studied his face. Hollis was always the smart one. The pretty one. The one who was going to get out of this place and never look back. She had 2 boyfriends in college, sometimes at the same time. Got good at keeping secrets. She tapped ash into an empty beer bottle. Our mom cleaned houses for rich people her whole life. Came home every day talking about their fancy kitchens and their vacation homes. Hollis swore she'd never be like that. Said she was going to marry someone rich and get what Mom never could. I'm not rich. No, but you're stable. Got your own business. Nice house. The kind of guy who'd take care of her while she figured out her next move. The words hit Martin like physical blows, each one dismantling another piece of the life he thought he'd built. She was obsessed with financial security, Lakin continued, always talking about retirement accounts and insurance policies. Even as a kid, she'd steal quarters from Mom's purse and hide them in this coffee can under her bed. Martin thought about their joint savings account, the one Hollis managed because she was better with money. He needed to get to a bank. The drive to Utah took 8 hours. Martin left Maceo with Cheyenne, ignoring her protests about taking time off work. This was something he needed to handle alone. Corey Alton's gym sat in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation office. Through the front windows, Martin could see rows of weight machines and mirrors reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Corey turned out to be exactly what Martin had pictured: tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that came from being physically strong. He was spotting a client on the bench press when Martin walked in. Help you with something? Corey asked after his client finished the set. I'm Martin Landry. We need to talk about Hollis Branner. Corey's expression went carefully neutral. Haven't heard that name in a while. My office, Corey said, leading Martin to a small room behind the front desk. The walls were covered with bodybuilding trophies and photos of Corey competing in various events. So you're the husband, Corey said, settling behind his desk. She said you were controlling. Wouldn't let her have friends. She tell you about Maceo? Corey's face went pale. What about him? You thought he was yours. Was. Corey leaned forward. What do you mean was? DNA test says he's mine. Corey stared at him for a long moment, then opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photographs, hospital pictures of a newborn baby, a toddler's first steps, birthday parties. She lived with me for almost a year, Corey said. Moved in when she was 6 months pregnant. Said the father was some deadbeat who wanted nothing to do with the kid. He handed Martin one of the hospital photos. Look at him. Martin studied the image. Even as a newborn, the baby had the same nose, the same chin shape, the same features Martin saw in the mirror every morning. Jesus, Corey whispered. He really does look like you. When did she leave? Last summer. Said she needed to visit her sick aunt in Portland. Took Maceo with her for what was supposed to be a week. Corey's jaw tightened. That was 8 months ago. She ever mention me? Said she had a restraining order against you. That you were stalking her. Corey stood up and walked to the window overlooking the gym floor. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Martin felt that familiar coldness spreading through his chest. Every revelation about Hollis stripped away another layer of the woman he thought he'd married, revealing someone calculating and manipulative underneath. She played us both, Martin said. Yeah, well, joke's on her. I don't have any money anyway. Corey turned back to face him. But you do, don't you? Successful business, nice house. She always asked a lot of questions about your finances. The meeting with Detective Frank Morrison took place in a windowless room at the Financial Crimes Unit downtown. Morrison was a thin man with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen every type of fraud humans could devise. Your wife was busy, Morrison said, spreading papers across the table between them. We found a secret account opened with your Social Security number. $67,000 deposited over 3 years. Martin stared at the bank statements. Regular deposits, sometimes small amounts, sometimes larger chunks. All while he'd been working 12-hour days to build his business. How, he asked. Joint credit cards with cash advances. Medical insurance claims for procedures that never happened. Tax filings claiming Maceo as a dependent and collecting child tax credits. Morrison pointed to another document. She even applied for a business loan using your information and forged your signature. What happens now? We build a case. Wire fraud, identity theft, tax fraud. But it takes time. These things move slow through the system. Slow. Martin had never been good at waiting. What about finding her? That's trickier. She's gotten good at staying off the grid. Paying cash, using fake names. We'll keep looking, but... Morrison shrugged. People can disappear if they really want to. That evening, Martin sat in his workshop with Maceo nearby, the boy playing with wooden blocks while Martin worked on a cabinet door. The repetitive motion of planning would help him think, helped him process everything he'd learned. Daddy, Maceo said suddenly. Martin looked up. It was the first time the boy had called him that. Mommy said you would hurt us. I won't hurt you, Martin said, and realized he meant it. Not because of any sudden flood of paternal love, but because the child was innocent in all this. A weapon Hollis had tried to use, but not by choice. She said we had to hide from you. What else did she say? Maceo thought for a moment, his 3-year-old mind working to translate complex memories into words he could understand. She cried a lot. She said sorry to me. She said she had to go away, but you would take care of me. Martin set down his plane. She planned this. All of it. But as he looked at Maceo, building a tower with the wooden blocks, Martin felt something shift inside him. Not love, not yet, but a recognition that this child represented something more than just Hollis's betrayal. He represented Martin's choice about what kind of man he wanted to be. The emergency custody hearing took place 3 weeks later. Martin sat across from the judge with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in family law. Given the mother's continued absence and the financial crimes investigation, Judge Martinez said, I'm granting full temporary custody to Mr. Landry. Temporary. Again, Your Honor, Torres said, my client would like to petition for permanent adoption proceedings. The judge looked surprised. Mr. Landry, are you certain? This is a significant commitment. Martin stood up. She used this child as a weapon against me. Stole from me, lied to me, tried to destroy my life. But she made one mistake. He looked over at Maceo, who was coloring in a book with Marla Vega. She forgot who she married. I don't quit. I don't forgive. And I don't let people win when they try to break me. That evening, Martin cooked dinner while Maceo sat at the kitchen table, chattering about his day at the temporary daycare Marla had arranged. The boy was starting to open up, his natural 3-year-old curiosity overriding the confusion and fear of the past month. Are we going to live here forever? Maceo asked. Yes, Martin said without hesitation. Even when Mommy comes back. Martin set down his spatula and turned to face the boy. Maceo, your mommy isn't coming back. She made some bad choices, and now she can't be your mommy anymore. Maceo absorbed this with the strange resilience of young children. But you'll be my daddy, if you want me to be. Maceo nodded solemnly. Okay. Later that night, after putting Maceo to bed, Martin sat in his workshop and called Cheyenne. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Adopting him, I mean, that's a lifetime commitment." "She wanted to ruin my life with a child," Martin said, looking at the custody papers on his workbench. "I'll build my future with him instead." Through the baby monitor, he could hear Maceo talking quietly to his dinosaur toy, telling it about their day. The boy was adapting, finding ways to make sense of his new world, just like Martin was 0.6 months past. Martin fell into a routine with Maceo that surprised him with its normalcy. Breakfast at 7, daycare drop-off at 8, work until 5, dinner and bedtime stories. The boy thrived on structure, and Martin found himself enjoying the challenge of being responsible for someone other than himself. Maceo helped in a workshop on weekends, sorting screws and handing Martin tools. The boy had good hands, steady and careful. Maybe he'd inherited something worthwhile. After all, that on a Thursday evening in March, Detective Morrison called. "We found her," he said without preamble. "Arrested at the Canadian border with fake documents and a new identity. Claire Wilson, according to her passport." Martin set down the sandwich he'd been making for Maceo's lunch. "Where is she now?" "That's the problem. Someone posted her bail. $50,000 cash. She walked out of the detention center yesterday." "Who posted it?" "Anonymous. Paid through a lawyer who won't say where the money came from." Martin felt that familiar coldness spreading through his chest. "She's running again." "Probably. But this time we're ready for her." That night, Martin double-checked the locks on all his doors and windows. He'd installed a security system 2 months ago, more for peace of mind than any real threat. But now the threat felt real. Maceo sensed his tension at dinner. "Are you mad, Daddy?" "Not at you," Martin said. "Never at you." "At Mommy?" Martin considered lying, giving the boy some comforting story about misunderstandings and second chances. But lies were what had gotten them into this mess. "Yes," he said, "at Mommy." Maceo nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. "She lied about you." "What do you mean?" "She said you were mean." "But you're not mean. You make good sandwiches and you read stories." 3 days later, Hollis vanished again. Her bail bondsman called the police when she missed her check-in appointment. By then, Claire Wilson had disappeared as completely as Hollis Landry had 6 months before. But Martin was no longer the same man who'd gotten that first phone call from the police. He'd learned from Detective Morrison, from Marla Vega, from his own mistakes in trusting too much. This time, he was ready. Martin started with social media. He created anonymous accounts on parenting forums and fraud victim support groups, posting Hollis's photo and story. Within days, other victims came forward. A single mother in Sacramento who'd been scammed out of her savings by a woman named Haley Bradford. An elderly man in Phoenix who'd lost his retirement fund to someone calling herself Helen Barnes. All the same woman. All the same pattern of lies and financial manipulation. The posts went viral in these communities, shared and reshared by people who'd been burned by similar scams. Someone created a website documenting all of Hollis's known identities and aliases. Within a week, her face was plastered across fraud alert groups from California to New York. Martin also worked with Marla Vega to build a comprehensive file for the court proceedings. DNA evidence proving Maceo's paternity, or what they thought was his paternity. Financial records showing the theft and fraud. Evidence of child endangerment and interstate flight. "This is thorough," Marla said, reviewing the documents in her office. "Almost obsessively so. I want to make sure she can never get him back. And if she never comes back, if she just disappears for good." Martin looked out Marla's window at the playground where Maceo was playing with other children from the daycare program. The boy was laughing, chasing another kid around the jungle gym with the unconscious joy of childhood. Then I raise him, and she becomes someone we used to know. But Martin knew Hollis would come back. She was too arrogant, too convinced of her own cleverness to stay away permanently. People like her always overplayed their hand. He just had to wait. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Martin was teaching Maceo how to sand a piece of wood properly. Always with the grain, never against it. The boy was concentrating intensely, his tongue poking out slightly as he worked. "Mr. Landry." The voice belonged to Dr. Chun from the genetics lab. "We need you to come in." There's been an issue with your paternity test. An hour later, Martin sat in the same sterile office where he'd received the news that changed his life. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers on his desk. "I'm afraid there was a problem with your original test," he said. "We've been conducting an internal investigation following some irregularities, and we discovered that several results were compromised." "What does that mean?" "Someone paid one of our technicians to falsify results. We've run a new test using samples from your original DNA collection, and—" Dr. Chen paused. "You're not the biological father." The words hit Martin like a physical blow. Around him, the office seemed to spin slightly, everything going out of focus except for the doctor's concerned face. "The original result was fake. I'm so sorry. We've terminated the employee involved and implemented new security protocols, but I know that doesn't help your situation." Martin sat in silence for a long moment, processing this new reality. He wasn't Macio's father, had never been Macio's father. The entire foundation of the past 6 months had been built on another one of Hollis's lies, that he could walk away. Legally, he had no obligation to the boy, could return him to the system and go back to his quiet life of working with wood and avoiding emotional complications. "Mr. Landry," Dr. Chun said gently, "are you all right?" Martin thought about Macio in his workshop that morning, carefully sanding the wood block, asking questions about grain patterns and tool safety. The boy who called him daddy and trusted him completely. "I want to adopt him," Martin said. "Sir, legal adoption, full parental rights. Is that possible?" Dr. Chen looked confused. "Well, yes, but given that he's not biologically related to you, she wanted to ruin my life with a child," Martin said, standing up. "I'll build my legacy with him instead." That evening, Martin sat Macio down at the kitchen table after dinner. "We need to talk about something important," he said. Maceo set down his crayon and looked at him with those serious hazel eyes that weren't his after all. "I found out today that I'm not your real daddy. Not the way you were born, anyway." Maceo frowned, trying to understand. "But you're still my daddy, if you want me to be. But it will be different. I would adopt you, which means the court would say I'm your daddy forever, no matter what. Even if mommy comes back, even if she comes back." Maceo was quiet for a moment, processing this with the strange wisdom children sometimes displayed. "Will you still teach me about wood? Every day. And read stories. Every night." "Okay," Maceo said, picking up his crayon again. "You could be my forever daddy." The adoption proceedings were interrupted by news that Hollis had been arrested again. This time, she'd been caught trying to access one of Martin's bank accounts using fake identification. The bank security cameras had captured everything. Martin attended the arraignment, sitting in the back of the courtroom as Hollis was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked older, thinner, her hair dyed blonde and cut short. But her eyes still held that calculating intelligence that had once attracted him. She saw him as she was seated at the defendant's table, and her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, and finally, calculation. Even now, even caught red-handed, she was planning her next move. The bail hearing was a formality. With multiple warrants and a history of flight, the judge denied bail and set a trial date for 6 weeks away. Martin testified at that trial, laying out the timeline of deception with the same methodical precision he brought to his woodworking. Financial records, DNA evidence, testimony from Corey Alton and Laken Branner. A web of lies that had taken years to weave and minutes to unravel under legal scrutiny. When it was Hollis's turn to testify, she tried the emotional manipulation that had worked so well in private. "I loved you," she said, looking directly at Martin from the witness stand. "I was scared. I needed money for the baby, for us. I thought if I could just get enough saved up, we could start over." Her lawyer had clearly coached her on remorse and victim blaming. She painted herself as a frightened young mother, overwhelmed by circumstances, making desperate choices to protect her child. Martin watched her performance with detached interest. She was good at this, he had to admit. If he hadn't lived through the reality of her lies, he might have been moved by her tears. When she finished, Martin requested permission to address the court. "Your Honor," he said, standing up in the gallery, "I'd like to respond." The judge looked surprised but nodded. "You may approach the witness stand." Martin walked forward, past the defense table where Hollis watched him with wary eyes. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough to see the fear she was trying to hide behind her practiced remorse. "I don't need revenge," he said quietly. "I've already won. The boy calls me Dad." Hollis's face crumpled. For the first time in the trial, her emotion looked genuine. "Martin, please." He turned and walked back to his seat without another word. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: identity fraud, child endangerment, grand theft, wire fraud, sentencing. The judge gave her 8 years in federal prison. 6 months later, Martin stood in the same courthouse for a very different proceeding. This time, Maceo sat beside him in a small suit and tie, swinging his leg from the chair that was still too big for him. "By the power vested in me by the state of Oregon," Judge Martinez said, "I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Martin Landry, you are now the legal father of Maceo Landry." The gavel came down with a sound like finality. Martin looked down at his son because that's what Maceo was now, legally and completely, and felt something he hadn't expected. Not the sudden rush of paternal love that movies promised, but something quieter and more solid. A sense of completion, of a job finally done right. "Are we done with the court stuff?" Maceo asked. "We're done." "Good. Can we go home and work on my birdhouse?" "Absolutely." That evening, Martin hung the framed adoption papers in his workshop, right next to a photo of him and Maceo building a small bookshelf together. The boy had insisted on helping with every step, from measuring the boards to applying the finish. Cheyenne stopped by for dinner, bringing a cake that said, "Congratulations, Dad," in blue frosting. "How does it feel?" she asked as they watched Maceo play in the backyard. "Different than I expected," Martin said. "Better. You think you'll ever forgive her?" Martin looked at his sister, at this woman who'd helped raise him when their mother couldn't, who'd supported him through the chaos of the past year without judgment. "No," he said, "but I don't need to forgive her to move forward." As if sensing they were talking about him, Maceo ran over and climbed into Martin's lap, still clutching his dinosaur toy. "Daddy, will you read me a story tonight?" "Which one?" "The one about the dragon who builds houses." Martin smiled. Maceo had developed an obsession with construction-themed children's books, probably from spending so much time in the workshop. "Sure thing, buddy." Later that night, after tucking Maceo into bed and reading 3 books instead of the promised one, Martin sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and looked at the adoption papers again. Blood doesn't define family, he thought, but betrayal defines enemies. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, but inside his house, everything was warm and safe and finally, completely his.